today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about
Rediscover your strengths. Rediscover the things that make you a man without being toxic. Strength and leadership are not the problem. It's the outdated expression of them that is. Toxic masculinity, in its cleanest definition, is uplifting oneself as a man at the expense of women. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship, and I'm your host, Rich Heller. And we're talking about, when did being a man become toxic? How do you reclaim your strength and purpose without the world saying, uh-oh, look at that, there goes another toxic man? What is toxic masculinity? We've talked about it in previous episodes. Toxic masculinity, in its cleanest definition, is uplifting oneself as a man at the expense of women. Toxic femininity, by the way, is uplifting yourself at the expense of women. Like, all those definitions were defined by the women's movement. Well, we don't disagree with the women's movement. The women's movement is on a mission to establish parity between men and women, which is truth. However, to say that everything is about protecting women is an exaggeration. What's happened over time is that we have lost our sense of masculinity. We have lost our sense of what being a man is. We have lost our sense of where we are stronger than women, and we've lost our sense of where women are stronger than men, right? Equality doesn't mean that you can do all the same things. It doesn't mean that you have all the same strengths. Equality means that you have equal impact. And the truth is that men cannot have impact in this world without women. I'm talking from a sustainability point of view. And women cannot really have an impact in this world without men from a behaviors that will create successful generations of the future point of view. Can't have one without the other. And if you can't have one without the other, there's some kind of equality happening there. You were raised to believe being strong, providing, and leading were good things. So why does it feel like those same qualities are now criticized or undervalued? Isn't this an amazing question? It feels like that because in the movement to claim greater influence and authority in the world, many of the qualities that made men are being discounted. In fact, if you Google toxic masculinity and listen to some of the guys who are talking about what it means to be a man, they're going to be telling you things like the woman is supposed to be subservient. What I tell her, she does. And there are women who think that's how it should be. Well, I would say, by the way, there is actually truth to that statement, and the reverse is also true. There are times when the man should be subservient to the woman, and what she says we should do. For example, let's talk about when a baby is born. No one understands better the need of that child than the woman who bore that child for 9 months. We don't know as much about that child as they do. Our knowledge base is subservient to them. Oh, we may have intellectual understanding from reading books, or there may be rare occasions where a man has raised several children already and a woman hasn't, and then in that instance, we know more. But the relationship with that child, she has a unique relationship with that child, having carried her for 9 months. Strength and leadership are not the problem. It's the outdated expression of them that is. Strength and leadership are masculine qualities. Women can engender masculine qualities, by the way. We, as men, need to reclaim what it means to be strong and to be a leader in the context of the bodies that we're born in, the genetic predispositions and chemical and brain, the structure of our brain, predispositions that gives us, the limitations of those as well, right? There's things that women do so much better than we do because of their structure. We need to embrace our strengths. And what does it mean to lead using our strengths? And as for the previous episode, right, that does not mean discounting our partner's ability to lead as per her strengths. But right now, we're talking about how men became the master of the house. All right, this episode is about the way it was. So I'm going to talk about some unpopular stuff. The way the man became the master of the house was even 100 years ago, it's 2025, in 1925, the immediate world of most families was a more physically dangerous place in which the man was counted on to provide immediate safety and security. A right to bear arms is a law that allows families to protect themselves. And it was in 1925, I would argue many, many men owned firearms, had weapons. I can tell you that in 1965, 67, 68, when I was growing up, it was not unusual for boys to have physical fights. It was not unusual for men to have physical fights. That this was all part of the culture. And around the time of the 80s or 90s, a shift was made in our culture. For A, our society reached a level of wealth where we weren't scraping to survive anymore. B, there was less immediate threat in the environment. The immediate threat became the way we treat each other, not predatorial behavior on the part of others. We'll just leave it at that. I'm just going to leave it at that. And C, women were advocating for more power and authority. And so laws were changed to eliminate the behaviors that men used to need to engage in order to provide safety for their household. 1925 and before, it was really up to each man to defend their home, and the police backed them up for the most part. Or the police were another force to be reckoned with. From 1925 up to 2025, we see the progression of the state interceding and creating more and more safety for the sake of production and productivity. We see the state interceding and creating more and more safety for the sake of um, equality and freedom, even. It makes a lot of sense. By the way, I'm not saying it was better back then. I'm just saying this is how it went down. 1925 and before, just to survive, there's a level of physical strength and aggressiveness that was needed. And let's get real. Body of women evolved, the physical body of a woman evolved in terms of survival. Let's go survival. Primarily evolved for gestation, birth, nurturing. Not that women can't and couldn't do other things, but in a survival world where survival is primary, that was it. And men are physically stronger. If you hit a man with a chair and you hit a woman with a chair, the man's more likely to get back up, like generally speaking, just built physically tougher. Men are not built for nurturing. We can be nurturers, but let's face it, we've got nipples that don't generate milk. They just don't work that way. We cannot yet carry a child to term. We're just not built that way. There's just physical differences. There's differences between our brains as a result. The brain that evolves in an estrogen-laden body spends more time being emotionally aware. Women have better peripheral vision. They're more aware of social relations. Studies now show that social relations on a survival level are right up there with food, because guess what? If you had strong social relations and you weren't finding enough food, you could hit on them for food. And when they go hungry, they could hit on you for food. If you don't have those social relations, instead, you're doing what? You're attacking each other for food. Social relations, which women are much better at, they're wired for it, genetically better at it than men. It's very primary for them. Environmental, ecological concerns are primary for them. Men are freaking trains on tracks. We have a goal. We're going to go out and hunt. We have a goal. We're going to plant the seed. We have a goal. We're going to weed. We have a goal. We're going to make sure that nothing's attacking our crop. We're going to have a goal. We're going to harvest the crop and separate the wheat from the chaff. We have a goal. We're going to make sure that grain gets ground. We work in goals, and we have less peripheral vision. We're less tuned to subtle emotions. We don't read body language as well as women do. We don't even read tonality as well as women do. That's just the difference between the bodies. And so, in a time when survival was primary, 1925 and before, the qualities of men became primary, because for a woman to bring a child to term, to have it, and to raise it, she needs to feel safe. And men are wired, created, structurally built in a survival world to create to enable safety. So those jobs were very distinct. And the man in a survival world becomes primary because the primary concern is survival. But even in that world, I would argue that men bowed to the wisdom and the knowledge of women around certain things. Even in that world, I would say that once the needs of survival were met, that women led in other ways. I would argue that. The painting we have of caveman history is that men went and clubbed a woman over the head and dragged her by the hair. Ain't no woman going to be happy with that. And if a man wants to be happy, his woman has to be happy too. Happy wife, happy life is true in that regard. They don't have one for happy husband, but there should be. But women know also that if their husband isn't happy, they won't be as well. Anyway, that's how we got here. Now, if you take those same behaviors from a survival frame and put them in today's world, where in American culture, it ain't about survival. In America today, you can survive better pulling food out of a garbage can or a grocery store dumpster than most people can in third world countries working. The food that a lot of people are buying in Vietnam, Cambodia, parts of South America, the food that people are buying in or parts of Africa are buying in some of those countries, the quality of that food isn't as good as the stuff that you can get dumpster diving, and I will testify to that personally, all right? This is not some knee-jerk liberal diatribe on how good it is, and this isn't some right-wing declaration. I'm telling you, as someone who was on food stamps and homeless, I lived really well dumpster diving. It was actually kind of amazing, and when I traveled to Cambodia and Vietnam and saw the quality of the food in the markets there, I realized that I, homeless as a youth, had it better than people who were working their asses off over there. They are surviving. We are thriving over here. And in a thriving economy where we're way beyond survival, we aren't worrying about whether we're going to eat. We're worrying about, are we eating as well as the Joneses? We aren't worrying about whether we're going to have a roof, many of us, though in this country that's becoming questionable at times. But most of us are more concerned about, are we going to have the best roof, the roof that makes my wife happiest? Are we going to have a roof that doesn't leak? It's a whole nother world now. And in this environment, equality between the sexes becomes a whole nother game. Pre-1925, much harder to establish, but doable. Men thought they were the bomb, and because our physical strength was needed to protect our families, we could lord it over our families also. But let's be honest, that's not the kind of relationship anybody really wants to have with their wife. That's not the kind of relationship anybody wants to have with another person. You don't like it when people bully you at work, and you don't want to be that person with your family. Toxic masculinity is all about that. It's about using our strengths to bully our partner, our children into submission. You don't have to use your strengths to do that. All right? You don't have to. The lessons of the old model were, what did we do with our strength? All right? In a survival world, we protected. How do we protect our families today? Well, some of us still have guns in our houses. That's true. But let's face it, home invasion is unusual, depending on where you live and how you have things set up. So what are some other ways that we protect our families? We protect our families by making sure that there is a roof that does not leak over our head. We protect our families by making sure that our home is structurally sound. We protect our families by making sure that our vehicles run properly. We may not do the work ourselves, but we're mindful of that. We protect our families by making sure that there's electricity, by making sure there's water, by making sure that there's warmth and comfort, by making sure that there are no hostile or predatory influences around them. Now that gets a little trickier because that slips into the world of our wives, but let's just stick with old world values and how they show up today. Provision. Today, many of us are married to women who have a higher income than we do, or we may even be stay-at-home dads, which I have no beef with whatsoever. What does provision mean in today's context? In the old world, provision meant we went out and got it and brought it in. Today, it means taking what there is and making sure that there's more of it, or that it's applied properly. As men, since we are wired to be trains on tracks that go to a station, the station we should have in mind is, where do we want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? What stage of life will we be in? What level of financial freedom do we want to experience? How can we take the money that's here and provide for our family with that money, whatever the source, in a way that ensures our shared vision for the future? Now, our wives may be better at managing that money, and it is our jobs to revisit that vision periodically and to make sure the train is on the track. Provision might mean that we're going to invest it. Investing it might look like we're going to buy a house and we're going to work on that house and improve that house and build equity in that house. We might take money that our wife earns, purchase a house, a bad house in a good neighborhood, but we have the skills to work on the house ourselves. We might upgrade the house, and then as it becomes a good house in a good neighborhood and the prices go up with the rest of the neighborhood, sell it and walk away with a whole lot more than she earned in the first place. It might be something like that. That's just a scenario. There's 100,000 different ways that we as men can be providers without necessarily earning income directly or being the primary income earner. I want you to separate that concept of provision from primary income earner. And I want you to think of provision as a long-term project. Provision being, where are we going? Where are we now? What do we need to get there? How do we distribute what we have so that we can keep moving forward? And I'm not talking about necessarily having $1 billion home. I'm talking more about, what does abundance mean to our family? What does it mean to be emotionally abundant? What does it mean to be spiritually abundant? What does it mean to be financially abundant? What will we do with that abundance? How do we share it with other people? How do we build up our families? How do we build up our friends? How do we build up our neighbors? How do we build up our communities? What do we invest in, regardless of the source of the income? Do we invest in spiritual communities that support and nurture our families? What do we invest in? That's the concept, the ancient concept of tithing was to imprint on people that there's value in taking what we earn and investing it in things that support our family. It is the man's job to hold that vision, not necessarily to create it, but to hold it, because you're hardwired for it. All right, that's protection, that's provision. How does the concept of serving our family apply today? And what is that concept really? Serving families as men, we might have seen that as going off to war and giving our lives to our family, and that still applies today, sadly. But it might also be because we are holding the vision. Part of serving our family might be eliciting from them, what are their strengths? What's their vision? And helping to guide them in staying on their track for developing themselves as whole and complete human beings, starting with our partner. If you're not helping your partner hold her vision for her future, you are not only failing to embrace service as a man, you're also failing in the contract that you entered into with your partner. So you need to get that on the front burner. Take care of yourself first, your marriage and your partnership second, your children third, and work will fall into place after that every time. So those are three core concepts. I like to think of it this way. Whether you believe Jesus Christ was a living man or a myth, the story of Jesus Christ is he was God born into human flesh. God born into human flesh. That's the story. And before he left, he washed the feet of his disciples, and he gave his life for the well-being of mankind, of his people. Right? That's service. That's the idea of going to war and giving your life for your country. Or an intruder comes in and you meet them at the door. Maybe you get killed, but you're protecting your family. That is the concept of service. But service is also that you're caring for your family. The act of washing feet, by the way, symbolically speaking, is if you go on through the text, it says that when we go through our day-to-day lives, we've washed our bodies and we've covered our bodies with robes, so our bodies are pretty clean. But back then, people mostly wore sandals, and so the feet got dirty. So symbolically, washing the feet means at the end of the day, it could mean, all right, symbolically, at the end of the day, helping washing your partner's feet might be helping them to unload the feelings, the negative emotions that they kind of got stuck on in the course of the day, the dirt on their feet. I was walking, you're walking through life and sometimes you step in some poop. At work, you have an experience and it gets stuck on you the same way. Washing your partner's feet might feel like helping them clean that off and unload it and recontextualize it. And, where we drop the ball as men doing that is very often that our partners come home and they want us to clean their feet. And instead we start telling them, well, if you walked in a different path, you wouldn't get that dirty. They don't want to hear that. They just want us to help them unload. They don't want us to fix the way that it happened. It's a big mistake that we make as men. And that's the beauty of that example from that story. So I'm just looking at my notes here. Here's some actions you can take to reframe masculinity. I want you to take a look at yourself and see, are you stuck on a survival mindset of masculinity? That survival mindset of masculinity is very limiting. Or if you go back to the last episode, do you have kind of a checklist? What's the word I'm looking for here? Uh, Trade view of relationship. Trade's not quite the right word. Um, I think the word that I'm looking for is consumer mindset. Maybe that's not quite it either. But what I want you to get is that if you embrace the spirit of service that's been exemplified by men, not just Jesus, but other men that you admire, you're going to invest more time in the well-being of your wife and your children and helping them to develop and grow in the long term, helping them to move towards that person who they've identified that they're becoming. And they will do the same for you. I want you to we're all going to work on shedding when we get angry, there's a tendency for us to, in the equality movement, there's a tendency for us to think that it's okay for us to express our anger to women the way they express it to us. But what I want you to get is that as a man, you're physically bigger and physically stronger. And even though we're not living in a survival mindset, your anger, your emotional anger and your physical anger is scarier to her than 9 times out of 10 than hers is to you, unless you were raised by a very angry mom. Um, and that's a slightly different. What I mean by that is if a lion is raised by a human being that's very angry and abusive, even when that lion becomes big enough to eat that human, it's probably still going to relate to that same person in a way that's like fearful of it. It will always go back to being that cub, right? So you may be that kind of lion, but most of us are lions that when we roar, the hair on our wives vibrates harmonically. When they roar, we just go, "Oh, look at that, she's roaring." It's just a different relationship. So, part of the mission is to take that old masculine self and find other ways to rechannel it. That survival man. We're going to do other episodes on this. What do we do with the survival-oriented man? When do we need him? We're not gonna kill him. We're not gonna get rid of him. It just seems like in the current context, he's not as needed. So, we're gonna be launching some men's group. Go to richinrelationship.com and look out for them. Not really sure. There's gonna be some kind of access to it, guaranteed refund or something. I want you to look at it though, because men really need to be in the business of uplifting one another, which is something we don't do too terribly well. And that's kind of what this series is all about. And in the meantime, I want you to have an excellent day and an amazing tomorrow.